Good morning, good morning. Happy Friday. Excuse my tardiness, but that's not going to matter because probably half of y'all are going to watch this after it's recorded anyway. But I look like this. I'm making it kind of purposeful. One, I don't know why I did this to myself. I'm doing the most today, and it's because I'm coming off a week of, well, really like a whole summer of doing the most and being on the go. But I also think it's true to the topic that I wanted to just kind of talk about today, and that's scams and the impact of like we're talking about external scams going on right now. So it's just kind of like an awareness update because I, only really watch the news to kind of see how I can help not only my clients cope, but, and generally anyone who ends up following my content. But then also the scams that are plaguing you and you probably don't even really know it. And one of them is related to appearance. And so my brand, when I first started really kind of putting myself out there professionally, and ultimately what that meant for my life was taking care of myself, prioritizing my health, prioritizing my mental health, because to me they're the same thing. And that was to be authentic and to be vulnerable, how to align with transformation. A huge tone of that is vulnerability. And one of which is sometimes I'm not going to put a face on. I'm not going to make sure I don't have filters on my pictures. Sometimes I may do like one of those like color filters to like make it pop and vibrant a little bit. Because who doesn't like a little like highlight, right? But I have no makeup on. I literally just got out of the shower. I'm packing for my vacation, which doing the most is because I'm leaving for a vacation finally to go see my family, to go back home, and my flight leaves in 3 hours and I'm still packing. Okay. So that's part of why, my hair is back, but is because my brand, when it comes to mental health, we really have to all take a true accountability when it comes to being and learning how to be authentic. And if you're not comfortable with yourself and with your insecurities and quite yet, and you still identify with being self-conscious, by all means, that's okay. I have insecurities still as well. The difference is that I've just now trained my mind not to attach to them and believe that I'm being seen for them. So I start that as a little disclaimer of the topic today is going to be scams and mental health. And this topic really, hit me a couple of days ago when I was driving. I do a lot of my thinking when I'm driving. So the fact that I've been on the go this summer, I have a lot of content that I have to record. I have a lot of talks that I have to do. And I'll be doing a lot of trainings professionally with those. So, stay tuned if you ever want to do an actual workshop with me, because my philosophy is personal development is professional development. And as a therapist, I have a point of view because I talk about certain things with people who you may not ever have contact with in your life. And so before we dive into this topic today, that's pretty much where it came from. Is I was listening to a podcast episode, the Wall Street Journal, which I will link the episode. That it's very brief. It's only about 20 minutes, which is why I love it, because it kind of gives me the news in a very small form and as protected as you can be when it comes to the news these days from bias and all that. And we were talking about the scams and when I was listening to the episode, I was like, dang, this is something that maybe I need to use as an example for people. If it's not happening to you, great. I don't want it to happen to you, but I also encourage every one of my clients, and I do not just, even though I have a niche client, my client is a human being. It's a provider. We all have a relatability to that aspect, and scams are at an all-time high. They're also correlated with a lot of the economic issues, the political issues that we have going on right now. So I'm going to hit it in 3 different points because I could talk for days about this, but I'm going to hit it home, I'm going to hit it on like local, and then I'm going to hit it on like a little bit more extended. So micro, meso, macro is kind of my forte. But I'm going to start from the outside in because that is ultimately probably the least relatable. Is not this type of scam may not be happening to everyone. It may not be happening to anyone. It may never have happened at all. However, I would not encourage you to believe it could never happen, because then your brain denies the fact that it could, and you start actually losing the cognitive ability to discern interactions and interpersonal exchanges. So specifically about this podcast episode. So I will link that episode in the description for y'all to listen to on your own time. But basically the gist is we are now literally, we have this huge issue that, not everyone necessarily has to be passionate about, but let's not deny that it's happening, and that's human trafficking. People are being abducted and used against their will to do things to take from other people. Whether you want to call it terrorism, whether you want to call it abuse, whether you want to call it whatever it is, it's happening and it's hurting people. And so what's happening in this podcast episode, they're talking about how people are being actually, and when I say abducted, that's the more aggressive form of human trafficking, but people are being coerced through job postings, people in other countries looking for jobs that are in good intention, who want to give back to the world, and their customer service jobs, once they actually get interviewed and selected for them, are they actually held against their will to have and basically get and build relationships with people, Americans, who are notorious for flaunting their money, and we won't go into that, but they are specifically kidnapped and held against their will to basically carry out the job of trying to take money and identity from people who don't really know how to protect themselves against that. And when I was listening to this episode, I realized that one of the biggest issues is it's not a personal failing. If you get targeted by a scam, it's not because you're weak. It's not because you're unsuspecting, but it is because there's been a negative impact from the socialization exposure that we've had since COVID. And this is something that I've noticed and also interacted with my clients about, because we have lost a lot. Not only stress levels have gone up, but we have lost a lot of our normalized patterns that we depended on in order to be able to stay out of fight or flight mode at a more consistent rate. And that has a direct impact on your ability to form social and interpersonal discernment about people's intentions, about asking correct questions. Because when I deal with this in my client sessions one-on-one, I deal with the person who's been in a very prolonged emotionally, this is what I call emotional suffocation, because they've grown up in a toxic family structure, because they've had significant trauma in their life, because they have been exposed and oversaturated with cortisol, and your central nervous system is off the chain and dysregulated. They're not able to actually build the social awareness or self-awareness, let alone the social awareness of other people and interactions and knowing what's appropriate. So we've got this culture of being really nice. We answer the phone when it rings. Now I do promote smiling at people. I'm not saying don't be nice. That is not the antidote here, okay? But I'm saying that because we've been nice for too long, and I could do a whole other talk on the difference between, if you're not going to be nice, what are you? Be kind. There's a big difference, but maybe a topic for another time. That when we are too nice, we become unsuspecting and unable to neurologically get online to discern and ask questions about someone who is contacting us, asking us personal information, building a relationship with us. Okay. Now that's an extreme. This podcast episode, I think, is highlighting a pretty extreme example. But what's not so extreme, because I know I've gotten at least 3 text messages like this, because I'm a business owner, I don't just answer my phone all the time because I'm not available. But I've gotten text messages from random numbers, not only from like the whole post office scam thing, that's one, but I've gotten text messages from people be like, hey, how have you been? Sorry, I've been so distant. And they're this very vague hook to trying to engage you in a text message conversation. And I don't know if it's the same thing, like if I'm on the receiving end of this person who's been abducted and forced to do this job, or if it is someone else who's in a less severe situation for their safety, and they're not able, and they're texting me, because it's coming from an American number. It's not happening on like WhatsApp or anything like that. And this is where a lot of people, and like this, just me talking about this, I know can cause some maladaptive occurrence from what I really want. And that's because I'm potentially evoking fear in you. And so I'm saying this as a reminder, Knowledge is power. And if you're activated in fear by just knowing that this is happening, let's take a breath. Because I don't want to necessarily prove, I'm not fear-mongering. My intention is not fear-mongering anyway. But what I can't control is people's reactions to stress. I can't control people's reactions and perceptions of what causes them fear. And especially if someone's ever been affected by a scam before, that is debilitating. Because it is, I mean, it's hit my own family before. I'm not going to tell anyone's business. But being a bystander, watching this person have an hope to obtain something that's being offered to them, that's manipulation. And that will hurt a person's feelings. And I don't care how strong and resilient you are, and if you're my client and you are an A+ student of mine, where you can literally navigate that, that's going to hurt my feelings. It hurt my feelings to watch this person go through that. And there is a rebound period. And so if you don't have any understanding of your own identity, of your own feelings, if you're impacted by a scam, that's gonna take a dent, not just financially. And that's if they get some kind of money or get your personal information. That's just to the ego. And then you're gonna be more susceptible to getting scammed again, because now you're in a refractory period, an emotional refractory period, where you're isolative, you're not trusting, you've been hurt. So therefore, providing yourself attention, if it's not a conditioned response for how you take care of yourself on a mind, body, spirit level, then this scam, that can really increase the risk of you being scammed again, okay? So my first point is really like, what's going on in the world? It is happening, it's real. Stay somewhat knowledgeable of what's happening so you can realize that, like, let people go to voicemail, y'all. I promise you, you'll hear their voice on a voicemail versus answering the phone and being like, oh, I need to feel like I'm connected with someone. Get your connections with other places, because random people calling your phone is not where you're going to start these connections. And this is where online dating gets its really, really toxic roots, is because any connection is a good connection. And this is where we have a mental health problem, is because that is so not true. You can feel a connection with anyone that is ultimately just spending time with you. You can have that companionship versus a partnership is very discerning here, is that someone can make you feel good without actually being connected to you. Now, I'm not saying if you feel connected to someone, doubt it, but give it time. Because the thing about a scam, the thing about why I didn't get ready today, is because it took time, and I did not have time before 10 a.m. because I was packing and I lost track of time. Is that the more that I put time into giving myself a certain appearance for y'all, I'm not calling myself a scam. I'm just saying is that when I start putting on makeup, when I start doing my hair, there is a degree of not intentional vulnerability, but there's a degree of mask that I put on that is not being truly authentic to my natural state. Right now, y'all got me at 100% natural. This particular camera may have a little bit of a natural filter in, but if you look at my Instagram right now, there ain't no filter there. Y'all can see the sunspots, whatever. I don't know what you see, but we ultimately put layers intentionally on ourselves because, one, we're scamming ourselves because our own emotions make us think we're less than. We don't like the feeling of what we look at in the mirror if we're not happy with ourselves. So if we're scamming ourselves, we become more susceptible to people scamming us. And so this is where I'm not going to dive into the black hole of dating right now because, one, I still got to finish packing, but I'm going to say that online dating we all know it. We all complain about it. I'm just hoping that you're at a point, I don't care if you do the work with me or you do it with someone else, that you start having conversations that get you away from complaining and get you to a point of understanding of how to protect yourself, and in turn reduce the actual impact of these interpersonal scams that we're going through, which is dating, which is marriage. Because we're so desperate to connect that any connection is a good connection. And I promise you, from personal experience, let me say it very intentionally, not professional experience. it is easy for me to help other people. It is more difficult for me to help myself and take accountability for my own life. But I, from personal experience, have been scammed in an interpersonal dynamic. It stems from my inability to really tolerate my own essence, my own identity. Ow. Sorry, excuse me. And because I was not intentionally pouring into myself, it was because I was not reflecting and knowing my own patterns and my thinking, and in turn my behavior and my relationships. My worth came from an outside in perspective, which is why y'all can look at me and be like, wow, she's got something. It's because I came the other way. I went from the inside out. My transformation for my body, yes, obviously you guys see me in the gym working out. I work hard, but it was cleaning out this shit in here. It was learning the inner engineering of my identity and what made me do the things that I'm doing, whether it be personal, professional, hobbies, whatever my interests are. And some of that changed. Not all of it though. I was thorough, and I went through and I dusted off some of the things that I had experienced in life. And I looked at it and I'm like, this is making me feel this way. Do I want to feel this way? Do I want to change that? And a lot of that had to do, if you watch my other videos, had to do with a lot of grief. It had a lot to do with trauma, had a lot to do with just understanding my own brain, because I had gotten to a point where I was operating so fast, and I'm also doing it somewhat in this period of the last month, because had my birthday, had a fashion show, I had a conference, and now I'm going on vacation. This is a period where I'm going to be going a little bit more fast. This vacation is where I start to slow down. That dynamic, that understanding of yourself is the protective factor against these scams that are going on, because your brain is not actually able to help you, and you're not able to use it as a resource if you're actively overwhelmed to the point and you don't know how to get yourself back online. Metaphorically, this is the symbolism of life, is if your computer crashes, you're not able to send emails like that. You may be able to have your phone, but if the internet crashes, you can't send an email. So this is where we have to find that balance, and I'm speaking in metaphorical terms, as well as this kind of goes for the topic, is to be less dependent on technology. This is why I die on the hill with my clients of paper. My to-do list, I got a to-do list on my phone, but my to-do list is written on paper with a pen, because it is here in this reality. It's here in this moment. And what mental illness is not having that connection and that trust within yourself to be able to extend that trust to other people. You guys can listen to my videos about trust in relationships. I have a combined one, which was more recent. And then if you go back in the archive on my YouTube, I've separated the topics of what trust is in terms of mental health and how you build that secure attachment with yourself to be able to interact in relationships and know how to trust people in a healthy way, because you actually trust yourself. That is I start from the root causes, which is why probably people don't really like to talk to me a whole lot, is because it can be overwhelming. It's deep. But it's what needs to be done. Okay? So if you had an infection, if you got a pimple, you want to make sure the whole pimple gets out, or else the remnants, the bacteria, is going to stay in your skin and cause an infection. It's going to cause hyperpigmentation. It's going to cause bruising, and you're going to keep picking at it, and then you're going to have a scar. It's a version of trauma. Emotional trauma is a little bit more tricky because it is invisible. They are invisible scars, invisible wounds. So when you do that work, you can do it on your own. But why I designed my program the way it is, because it does need to be monitored, because you're biased naturally. I'm biased. I tell you all that is like, my bias is based off my experience and my understanding of the world. May not always work for everyone, but my goal is that it can work for a lot of people. And because you're understanding yourself, and everyone has a different composition, whether it be a body type, experiences in life, traumas, everyone's composition is a little bit different. So therefore, that's how working together reduces that bias. And that's the difference between talking to a therapist and talking to a friend, or doing everything on your own, is because you get that perspective. Okay. So remember, first point was knowing what's going on outside of yourself in the world with scams. So that podcast episode, y'all listen to it, I highly recommend. You just consider, when you listen to it, you just consider what's going through your mind. What do you relate to? What feeling comes up when you hear that information? Because that could also tell you that the relationships that you have, if you get similar feelings elsewhere in your life, there's a reason. You're the common denominator. So that may be your first indicator that someone in your life, when I say scamming, I'm not saying that they're, I am saying that they're manipulating you. Do they know they're doing it? Maybe not. I tell my clients I never try to speak to someone's intention, because they likely, if they're not intentional, they will not be able to tell you that they're being intentional, and they won't know. But you can take it as fact. What they do, what they say, whether it lines up and whether or not they're trustworthy, that is a micro version of a scam in your life, okay? If they don't line up with what they say that they're doing, how do they respond to the situation if you have to hold them accountable? Or if you say something, do they accept accountability? Do they accept responsibility? Because I can guarantee that's going to be a slippery slope right there. If they are not able to say like, oh yeah, no, I said this is when I have to do a lot, because today is a perfect example. I'm supposed to be packing, leaving for my trip. I don't want to say I overbooked myself because I'm here and I did it, but if I really didn't have a good relationship with my time that I've worked on for like 7 years and still continuously work on, that I would have to acknowledge like, y'all, I was a little late. I said that I was going to be able to do this, but I wasn't accurate in my ability to follow through. That acceptance of accountability is going to tell you a whole lot about how you guys can move forward. So if this isn't an interpersonal dynamic to the point where you don't feel like you want to be all in with this person, it's probably because they're not matching up with what they say and what they do. What you do, what you say what you do. That's one of my program philosophies in terms of like how you find healthy relationships, how you transform your life. If you have weight that you have to lose, your relationship with self and your word is the number one thing that you should be protecting. What you say should be what you do to some degree and follow through, or you take accountability, and what you do, what you say. And that's the programming that you're like, literally the words that you speak. I'm going off topic a little bit here. So let me bring this back around, because I would think to close this home, I don't know what I was saying there, to bring this back around and to really kind of drive this home. That's what it was. Drive this point home is that since COVID, and so another video of mine that you might want to watch to kind of really go deeper into this concept is oxygen and mental health in my video library, because COVID wreaked havoc not only on stress levels. Stress levels affect our breathing, and our diaphragm as a muscle has constricted. So we're receiving less oxygen, which is why I just took a deep breath and I had to like slow down. You have to retrain muscles, but it's causing an immense amount of stress. That stress has been going on for so long, far before COVID. It just amped up the heat by 10 degrees, and that makes a huge difference. It may not sound like a big difference, but 10 degrees, it's 85 right now. If it were 95 right now, that's a big difference. Okay, so, but why stress has gone so overlooked for so long? One, just because mental health has not really been taken seriously for a long time. We see it as physical health and mental health as two different things, but your brain is in your body. You got to take care of it. But a lot of it's been invisible, difficult to conceptualize, which is why I like to do what I do, is I get to create realities for people to help them understand their own. Where was I going with that? When we have been under this stress for so long, we've come from a very toxic framework, specifically in our family structures. And if you've grown up in a family where alcoholism, mental illness, or just reactivity, if you've ever felt invalidated by family members or parents specifically, or whoever raised you, then you slowly have suffocated emotionally over time. Because there's a degree of stress where you're like, and if you don't regulate that breathing again, your brain goes offline, and ultimately you become undercompensated from experiences. Psychosocial development is very, very delicate, and it's never going to be perfect. So this is where it's kind of a joke, but it's serious, is I have some job security, is because we're constantly going to be in a developmental stage till we die. So if you've not kept up with that philosophy, yes, you're behind, but it's pretty easy to get caught up. It's just like school, let's do some assignments, get back into the rhythm of things. You'll catch up, you'll pass the class, you'll get the grade, you'll move on. Because life, that's the constant thing. We call it the constant thing is change. The constant thing is time is moving. Time is moving forward. And when we're reactive, when we're in a stress response, it's moving faster and faster, which is why it can, hours can go by. When I was super stressed out, not paying attention a lot to my own mental health and had those practices in place, I used to be able to stare at the wall for like an hour and a half because I was so dissociated, was so just mentally burned out. And now when I do it, I can cut the time shorter. So now I'm not wasting any time. I'm not reacting to the time I've wasted and in turn triggering the cycle again as to where my time is bleeding out and my energy is directly, it's the same thing. Time and energy are literally the same thing. So if you're feeling tired, it's because you've been overdrained, you've been overstressed for so long, and you've not actually been able to tap into the resources internally, aka your emotions, and the energy that you produce on your own to actually be able to use as a reserve for how to compensate for that energy. So why am I saying this, and how does that relate to a scam? Well, that's the big protective factor, is that we just got done talking about that interpersonal trust. If you know what you need, what you desire in life, and I don't mean the material things, I mean the stability, the emotional security, the values, the consistency. If you don't know those things, then you're not going to be able to see them when someone random texts you on your phone, and you're not going to remember to ask, hey, can you remind me who this is? Because your memory is affected. You've slowly, ADHD is not like, oh, my memory is bad. It's because you've been emotionally and energetically suffocated for so long that your brain has compensated and created neural pathways out of efficiency because it has less space to work with. There are parts of your brain that are not lighting up to a sustainable way, in a sustainable amount of time, because you're so used to being so fast that it's like, ooh, we're just going to take the expressway. So sitting in traffic irritates the shit out of you. Used to irritate the shit out of me. Now I enjoy it because I'm like, you know what? I got time. I don't want to rush. I'm 35 years old, about to be like 36 in another year. Do I want to rush every single where I go? Because the way that I act will increase that reactivity and ultimately cause more stress on my body and reduce the amount of time that I have on this earth. We're at a point, it's 2024. If you've not heard that stress kills, I want to talk to you because I want to know where the hell you've been. Because I've heard that since I was a child. Did I understand what to do with it? No. Do you understand what to do with it? Well, probably not. Do you even really know what stress is in terms of like what it feels like? Maybe not. A lot of people do. What do you do with that information? There's a lot, and this is ultimately why therapy is a resource to use, is because it's actually a space that gives you a little bit of a safe haven away from the things that are stressors to you. So your brain can start to build a discernment between like, oh, we're not in that environment. It's assessing for you. You have your own navigation, your own threat management, risk management, all right in here. But if you did not grow up learning those skills and having to be able to discern that information, then it's not a feature that you even know about. I got an example, actually, it just made me think of this. Nothing to do with scams, but everything to do with, or I guess in a way, it justifies my point of if you've been in stress for so long that you don't know what to ask. I used to have a car. It was a 2014 Ford Edge SEL, and my favorite color blue. It's actually the color blue on the, like, blue is my favorite color if you have not figured that out yet. And it was the size I wanted. It was an SUV. I was in it, right? That was my car. I had it for a couple of years. Check engine light comes on. I take it to the mechanic, and they're like, your turbo's out. And I was like, what's a turbo? I could figure it out. I'm like, oh, it sounds fast. I don't have a turbo. What are you talking about? No one ever told me that I had a turbo. Never ever told me that this Ford Edge could book it down the highway. Because because literally the solution of like a turbo being like broken, I don't know the terms, I'm not a mechanic, is to use it. You have to train it. You have to get the fuel going in there at a degree of urgency so it stays usable. So this turbo, and of course this model, of all the models that I had, this turbo was one collective part versus having one part that they needed to replace. It was because it was one part that just really needed to be replaced. But of course, Ford this year model did not have, it was all one piece. And it was a minimum of $2,000 just for the piece. And I was like, no, I know that's a scam for my bank account, so I can't do that. And then, but if I look at my pattern, I didn't listen to my mother. There we go. I admitted it. If she watches this video the whole way through, she will get her validation. She always told me, don't buy a new car until you have some stability. It wasn't this car, but I bought another car before I even had my first paycheck out of grad school. And they gave me that car. No problem. My credit was good. They're like, cool, you just got a copy of your pay stub. Cool. Next payment in a month. I get paid in a week. Just because I didn't have my first paycheck doesn't mean I wasn't going to get it. And I started at that point operating out of my means financially because I was not operating within my means of knowing how to manage my energy because I wanted things outside of myself. And ultimately it graduated into me being in these really chaotic scenarios with cars. And I had to just keep rolling over debt because everyone knows you buy a new car, it loses its value as soon as you drive it off the lot. And then it took me 10 years, y'all. And it wasn't until last year when I had to go through and lose a hell of a lot more money in other circumstances to learn this lesson, did I realize that I had finally broken that pattern. Because I was able to, after that car, I had to that turbo went out. And I was like, I didn't even know I had a turbo, right? That was the whole point of the story, is that when you don't know how to ask questions, and you don't know what you don't know, first of all, you can't blame yourself for that. I didn't know that. I'm using it as an example now for you to realize that when you grow up in a degree of chaos and a degree of stress and you do not have preventative measures for emotional regulation and understanding of yourself, you will make dumb decisions just because of sheer ignorance. You don't know what to ask. You don't know what you don't know. And ultimately, it will cost you more money over time because you're moving so fast and you're operating out of more desire than necessity. Will you get yourself into situations that you can be scammed, which is why we have all this resistance to like, oh, car salesmen are just trying to sell you something. They're not authentic. I can't speak to anyone's authenticity. I can speak to the fact that they have a job to do, and it's not their fault that I don't know how to ask questions. It's not their fault that I don't take the time to do research and I just go after what I want. And so when it's time to accept accountability, if you've ever been scammed by someone, it's not your fault, but it is partly your responsibility because you existed in that experience. You existed in a situation that required you to see more than just what was in front of you. And some of that's not your fault because if you've not learned about your brain health, then you're not going to know how to ask those questions. That's ultimately what I do with people, is I try to clear out some of that space so their brain, their memory can come back. New neural pathways start to form. They heal their brain because it is possible. It's not as possible if you're constantly putting toxins in your body, such as alcohol, drugs, sugar, all these things. Not all sugar, but and alcohol is not just bad. I teach people how to live a life with all those things around them. So when you're thinking, like, ooh, I'm not sharp. I know I have something this morning that I realized. I was like, ooh, I'm a little stressed out. Because my memory started failing. And that's my first indicator because I worked really hard to come back from things that I forgot. I had circumstances in my life that I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot. Forgetting is your responsibility. I promise you. Sometimes I hate it for you, but I love it for you because once you accept that responsibility of like, man, I forgot and it really sucks because I know I disappointed you, you can move on. You can move forward. Now, if that person, it gets a little complicated in impersonal situations because if they hold that to you, they're doing the same thing. They're not taking accountability because they're wanting to blame you more than take accountability for what their feelings are and not making their feelings your responsibility. which is a scam in itself. So it's subtle. So let's start with the bigger one that's outside of ourselves, where you can see it. And if it hasn't happened to you, great. Do not fear it will happen to you, because that will literally attract it to you, because fear will lock your brain up again. But once you realize, taking a look at in your interpersonal relationships, who is being consistent in what they say they do, and how do you feel about it? How do they react when you say something? And unfortunately, that's where the hard work starts to come in, because you have to go through, when you go through the relationship with yourself, that's the first thing that you need to do to create security and protection from a scam, is don't scam yourself by not doing what you say you're going to do, or tricking yourself into thinking that you just can keep putting it off and it's not going to have an impact. It will. And it will have an impact, make you think that these other people in your life who are actually pretty supportive and pretty accountable to their behavior, they're not actually doing what they're doing, but it's because you're playing the script in your mind that they're untrustworthy because you externalize trust to other people and you have not created trust within yourself. Okay. Once you can do that, you're able to discern, like, oh, this person texting me, random number, never seen it, I don't have any threat. Even if you delete your text threads on your phone, you'll know generally, like a 929 number, when you Google, like, what's 929 area code? Salt Lake, Utah. I ain't never been there. I have never been to Utah. To my recall, I can't think of anyone I've ever met from Utah. So why the hell am I texting someone back from Utah? Anyone? You shouldn't be. You don't need to. Just don't respond. And if it's uncomfortable for you not to say anything, let's talk, because there's something ongoing inside of you that, again, you just need to be able to know how to cope with, so it doesn't control your behavior. If you are a controlling person, it's because you're not coping. And if you are a overly coping person, it's because you're not taking control over the things that you have control over. I'll expand on that another time too, because now I'm getting long-winded and I have to finish packing. So I think I drove my point home, because I don't want to oversaturate you guys with this, is remember, you are the common denominator. You have to cope with the things that seem uncopable, but I promise you, they're copable. They can be coped with. They can be dealt with. Sometimes it does have a degree of control, the things that you have to change to be able to cope better with it, because sometimes things are just really, really freaking tough. And once you learn more about trust within yourself, you will be able to discern who other people are trustworthy. Never about their intentions, but whether or not you trust them and whether or not you are able to discern if it's a healthy situation or not. I think that's a really good place to pause. I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. And in itself, I could expand upon our whole political situation right now, just based off of this one topic of scams and mental health. So if you listen to this and you've gotten to the end, maybe consider how what I've said about scams apply to the presidential race right now, okay? And see whether or not that changes ultimately how you talk, or excuse me, not how you talk, how you vote. It's really just a matter of voting. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I'm going to tell you, as a therapist who deals with a lot of interpersonal trauma, personality disorders, severe and persistent mental illness, there are candidates out here that are scamming the heck out of you, but it's so covert that it seems familiar. And when something seems familiar to your chaos, it's a confirmation bias. And I would just say, Google Stockholm Syndrome. That's all. Okay? No judgment, but Google Stockholm Syndrome. Okay? So in itself, that's like the scam of trauma right there. Okay? And if you ever have any questions about it, please feel free to DM me. I'm going to stop now because I need to go back. I keep saying it, but I'm going to go do it. And so I will be on vacation. I will probably not. I'll take another week off and do follow up in my next week and talk a little bit more about another topic when it comes to mental health and the impact. And again, the antidote is how you connect with yourself sets the tone for how you connect with other people and how you protect yourself and build resiliency. Okay, you guys have a great weekend. I'm off to celebrate my family and their birthday and spending time in my hometown and eat some good seafood because